There is a specific coordinate in America where the boundary between a neighborhood and a graveyard dissolve. It sits on the south side of Chicago, at the corner of 64th and King Drive. A place where a nickname travels farther than an address, and the comments section feels like a crowd gathered around a cage. From the sky, the architecture looks almost beautiful, symmetric, orderly, a fortress of brick and iron gates. But if you walk past those gates, the air changes. The silence there is heavier. It is the silence of a place that is holding its breath. But let me ask you something, slowly. What if the monster is not a person? What if the monster is the loop? Because this story is not just about violence. It is about a neighborhood that became a brand, and a brand that became a trap. Decades ago, this complex, Parkway Gardens, was a dream. It was housing built with the hope of stability, a place people could point to and say, "This is ours." Reporting has described it as once home to Michelle Obama before it became the large, affordable housing complex people recognize today. But cities change. Money moves. Systems decay. And in some places, hope does not disappear all at once. It rots, quietly, until the walls still stand but the future feels thinner. Over the last 10 years, the dream died and a myth was born. The internet knows it by a different name. They call it O-Block. They call it the most dangerous stretch of pavement in the United States. But that label is too simple. It doesn't capture the true horror of what happens here. This isn't a story about gangbanging. This is a story about a fishbowl, a cage where young men are trapped in a loop of vengeance, while millions of strangers watch them die through the glowing screens of their smartphones. We are going to walk through the gates. We are going to uncover why the rappers started vanishing, who is actually funding the war, and why the federal government finally decided to lock the cage and throw away the key. Welcome to O-Block. To understand the haunting, you have to know the ghost. Names in this city are not given at birth. They are earned in death. Before 2011, this complex was just Wick City. It was a stronghold for the Black Disciples, a territory in a standard turf war. But on August 11, 2011, the war claimed a 20-year-old named Odee Perry. When Odee fell, the neighborhood didn't just mourn him. They consumed his identity. The residents renamed the complex in his honor. Parkway Gardens became O-Block. And here is where the horror begins. Not the Hollywood kind, the real kind. But in the world of street mythology, renaming your home after a murder victim is a blood oath. It tells your enemies that you are married to the grave. By taking Odee's name, the young men of the block inherited his enemies. They inherited his target. And ghosts do not stay quiet when the internet is listening. This is where the horror begins. It wasn't just about territory anymore. It was about ghosts. The O became a brand, a symbol. And suddenly, killing wasn't just about survival. It was about marketing. Local reporting described it as a place marked by repeated shootings. A Chicago Sun-Times analysis said 19 people were shot on that block between June 2011 and June 2014, making it the most dangerous block in Chicago for shootings in that period. Think about that number for a second. 19. That is not a statistic. That is 19 moments where a normal day snapped in half. 19 times someone ran, someone screamed, someone called a phone that did not answer, someone looked out a window and saw panic moving like weather. And while that was happening, something else was rising from Chicago. Something the internet would fall in love with. Drill. A new sound was rising from the basement studios of these apartments. A style that could blur music and confession, art and threat, mourning and marketing. A soundtrack that made entire neighborhoods feel like characters in a story, and young men feel like they had to perform their pain to prove it was real. Then came the algorithm. The algorithm does not reward context. It rewards intensity. So the block became content. The name became clickable. The myth grew teeth. And as the myth grew, the cameras came closer. People started treating Parkway Gardens like a destination, like a place you pull up to for a clip, a trophy video, proof you were brave enough to stand near somebody else's fear and survive the upload. Imagine living inside that. Imagine you were trying to keep your little brother safe, or carry groceries, or get through a week without bad news. And you look up to see a stranger filming your gates like it is a haunted house attraction, broadcasting your home to millions. Every car that slowed down could be a fan wanting an autograph, or a rival gang using the live stream to pinpoint a location for a drive-by. The residents were no longer just fighting for territory. They were fighting to not be entertainment. Violence usually stays contained in the poverty-stricken zip codes where it starts. But on August 4th, 2020, the monster broke out of its cage. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the Gold Coast, one of the wealthiest, most heavily policed districts in Chicago. Carlton Weekly, known to the world as FBG Duck, was shopping for a birthday present for his son. FBG Duck was the lyrical king of the other side, the opposition. In broad daylight, on a street lined with luxury boutiques, 4 gunmen jumped out of 2 cars. They didn't care about the cameras. They didn't care about the witnesses. They hunted him down on the sidewalk. It was brazen. It was arrogant. And it was the mistake that brought the sky down. The federal government does not care about local gang feuds, but they do care about racketeering. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office built a case that stated O Block was not just a neighborhood. They defined it as a criminal enterprise. They used the RICO Act, the same laws written to dismantle the Italian mafia. They alleged that the gang used the internet to claim credit, to distribute drugs, and to coordinate hits across state lines. The rappers who had been flaunting their immunity online suddenly went silent. This is the mystery of the missing rappers. They didn't disappear. They were extracted. One by one, the most prominent faces of the block were handcuffed and led into federal custody. In January 2024, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. The sentences for the core members were mandatory life in prison. The music stopped. The Instagram stories went dark. The men who wanted to be legends became inmate numbers in a federal database. But the true horror of O Block isn't that the gang members went to prison. The horror is that the building is still there. The O is still painted on the walls. The grief is still in the stairwells. And there is a new generation of children walking through those gates right now. They are growing up in the shadow of the myth. The internet will eventually get bored and move on to the next tragedy. The tourists will stop visiting. But the families? They can't log off. They can't unsubscribe. O Block was never a movie. It was a warning. And the scariest part of the story is that we watched the whole thing happen and did nothing